The ayes are 57, the noes are 64. The question is not agreed to. Honourable Todd McLeod.
Chair, thank you very much. I was worried for a moment there I wouldn't have an opportunity to speak to the title of this bill. And I want to, before I do, to congratulate the mover of the bill, Paul Goldsmith, for an excellent piece of work. Mr Chair, members opposite have been a bit flippant about this legislation and the importance of it. But I can honestly say, when looking at the title, this Act is the Electronic Transactions Contract Formation Amendment Act 2012. Anybody sitting at home at the moment watching their television who has entered into an electronic transaction, who is concerned about whether the contract has been formed or not, will be reliably now informed that Mr Goldsmith has their best interests at heart, and I congratulate him for that. So, Mr Speaker, others in this debate so far have spoken about bills that have come before the House by members and the titles of those bills. And some of the members of the opposition have not seen the relevance of that in as far as this debate is concerned. Well, I would argue that it is relevant because, Mr Speaker, if you get the title of a bill wrong, it can give the wrong impression as to exactly what it is the member is trying to achieve. And there have been many examples of this, of very well-meaning bills that have fallen on the steps of this Parliament because they haven't gained the vote or support that they need, because members, often from the opposition, have not understood the importance of them, what they're trying to achieve, because the title has not been done correctly. In the case of Mr Goldsmith, who we've heard from him firsthand, so narrowly avoided becoming a lawyer and instead decided to look backwards in history so that he could learn from the mistakes of others, and that he could therefore come forward with a bill with a title that is about the future, not about the past. He has put great depth and detail into this. So the Act is the Electronic Transactions Contract Formation Amendment Act 2012. Now, the member responsible for the bill spoke eloquently at the beginning of the debate, but he has not answered the questions that have been posed. And the question I have, in fact, I have many questions for him. But in this case, the first question is, when he decided to name this the Electronic Transactions Contract Formation Act, well, why contract formation? Because actually it could just be the Electronic Transactions Act 2012, and that would be enough. But there would be people out there who have unknowingly, unwittingly entered into contracts as a result of an electronic transaction, not knowing they did so, and therefore there would be obligations imposed upon them, one assumes, and is that the reason that he's decided in the title to include contract formation? There will be people who have wanted to enter into contracts, I'm sure, and were not sure that they were able to do so when they entered into that electronic transaction. Mr Speaker, this is quite a weighty piece of legislation. And this, although on the surface of it, it may not be clear it will touch many lives of New Zealanders, for those who have had issues in the past around contract law, for those that actually maybe didn't narrowly avoid the obstacles that would have been placed in the way of Mr Goldsmith, who continued on to study law, they know how detailed, how complex, how very, very difficult contract law can be anywhere in the world, particularly in New Zealand. So I'm very interested to hear from him about exactly why he decided this should be the title. And I would say it's so very important because, Mr Speaker, I've been in this Parliament now, this is my 6th year. And I do remember many, many opportunities, many occasions where the opposition has kept us here talking late into the night about whether or not the title of a bill should be changed. And actually it was enjoyable, and that's one of the great things about this Parliament. When a government has an important piece of business to do, we don't mind sitting aside and letting others who don't want there to be any question as to whether or not they're intelligent or not. They're happy to stand up on the other side in the opposition and decide to get rid of any doubt at all by going on and on about things that they think the government hasn't got right. But in this instance, I guarantee, Mr Speaker, any moment now a member from the opposition will decide that actually Mr Goldsmith hasn't done his job properly, he hasn't thought this bill through properly, that it's going to do other things than are suggested in the title, and they'll come forward with a swathe series of SOPs and during the committee stage to make changes. And that's why we have to decide whether or not it is right and whether Mr Goldsmith has got this right. For my part, I think from my reading of the bill, and I've spent quite a bit of time looking over it before deciding to make an intervention, he has it about balanced. Mr Chair.
Honourable Todd McClay.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. I was going to conclude, but one other thought came to mind, so I'll continue for a moment, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity for this. So I wonder whether, in reading this bill, spending quite some time looking at it part by part. Well, the members asked how sad I am. Well, I've got to tell you, looking at what's happened to the polls, not as sad as the members opposite. So I've got to tell you, if my party was 29% in the polls, I wouldn't have that grin on my face. I would be focusing on this legislation, because the reason there are differences in the way the different parties in this House are polling at the moment is that some members on this side of the House come here to make a difference to New Zealanders. And Paul Goldsmith, with his bill, is one of those members, Mr Speaker. Mr Chairman, he's one of those people that wants to make a difference in the life of New Zealanders. He's worked so very hard in the last 3 years that he's been in this Parliament, and this piece of legislation is merely one part of the hard work that he's done over the last 3 years he's been here, and this title will send a message, a very clear message to New Zealanders about what he is deciding to do on their behalf, so that they can be more comfortable in their commercial lives or their private lives when they are engaged with the internet, when they're working with their banks, when they are looking at their electronic transactions of very many different types and the contractual obligations they have, or exactly how that contract is formed. So, Mr Speaker, this Act is the Electronic Transactions Contract Formation Amendment Act 2012. I think this is an excellent piece of legislation. I think Mr Goldsmith has done a very important piece of work here. I think that I very much look forward to taking many more calls when we get into some of the substance of this, because that will be so very important that we have a clear understanding. One of the challenges you have is, in the case that members opposite don't fully understand the intricate detail of the bill that Mr Goldsmith has brought before the House, it may be that we need to consider a change to the title. And that's why this Parliament has decided any member may take the floor to talk about the title of a bill so that we can make sure we get it right. Now, in the case of what Mr Goldsmith has done here, if it wasn't correct, one day in the future, when his great-great-grandchildren look at the sterling work that, because he's a great family man from Epsom, the sterling work he did here, they may only see the title, and they wouldn't fully appreciate the many hours of detailed study and work he put into formulating this idea and in the research to draw up the bill and then to go to all parts of this Parliament to lobby them to get their support so that he could put it into law. And they may see that actually, with a title that wasn't well thought out, that this was a trivial piece of legislation. But indeed, Mr Speaker, as I've said, Mr Chair, as I said earlier, I think he has the balance about right, at least in my simplistic understanding of this legislation, and that those in future who may look only at the title and not take the time to read the great detail of this bill, should it become an act, then they would see that it is a piece of work with great gravity, and that he's a man with gravitas. So, Mr Speaker, can I again thank him for bringing this, Mr Chair, bringing this to the House, congratulating him for so very narrowly avoiding the direction he could have fallen in and moved towards a career in law. Had he become a lawyer, I'm sure there would have been many more words in this bill, but I'm not sure so much would have been added to it. So if he could address my question about exactly why he decided that this was the title that this bill should have, I would be eternally grateful. The title, this Act, is the Electronic Transactions Contract Formation Amendment Act 2012. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Sue Moroney.
I move that this committee reports progress.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Noes have it. The party vote will now proceed.
New Zealand National.
59 opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 in favour.
Green Party.
14 in favour.
New Zealand First.
7 in favour.
Māori Party.
3 in favour.
Mana.
1 in favour.
ACT New Zealand.
1 opposed.
United Future.
1 opposed.
Brendan Moore.
1 in favour.
The ayes are 60, the noes are 61. The motion is not agreed to. Dr. Zhang Yang.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I appreciate the contribution of my colleagues. They have argued very eloquently the necessity